Okay, it is the 25th of March and the forecast for the whole week is plus 10 Celsius, which is quite unseasonably high. So I figure it's got to be time to put my brewery together for the season and get a batch of beer going. So here is my brewery as it's been stored all winter long. It is finally no longer covered with snow and it needs to be put into service for the year. You can see my kettle is upside down so it doesn't fill up with snow and ice, and my mash tun has the lid on it upside down for the same reason. So what we're going to do today is we're going to put this thing into service, and I will show you a little bit about my brewery in the process. You can see there's still a fair bit of ice on the ground. Hopefully by the end of this week that will mostly all be gone. So here's my kettle with the controller on top. The kettle is still upside down. You can see that it is an electric kettle. I've got a couple of elements inside. We'll see that in a moment. This down here plugs into my controller actually. We'll show you this in more detail briefly. And the controller has a standard stove plug on it, which I plug into a stove outlet, a special stove outlet that I have. I'll show you that as well. Let's flip this thing over and take a look inside that kettle. Okay, there we have it. You can see in there I've got a couple of hot water heater elements, and I've got a screen that's shaped like a T. I'll just point to it here. This is a stainless steel screen that goes into this stainless steel pipe here, and the pipe goes into the back end of the spigot, and the spigot comes out on the front of the kettle here. And we'll get to see this in action very shortly, well, within the next couple of days anyway. So if I pull out the kitchen stove here and look behind it, you can see that the stove plugs into a regular stove outlet over there, but there is another stove outlet right here. Now this one is different. When you go down to the electrical panel, the breaker for this outlet is GFCI, which is important because we're dealing with water and electricity. So a regular stove outlet breaker would not be a good idea because you could electrocute yourself. So I'll go down to the panel and I will show you the GFCI breaker that's at the other end of this. Alright, here's my panel. Here you can see a regular stove outlet breaker, and over here you can see the GFCI one. It's got the test button like a regular GFCI breaker has. It's terribly expensive. The damn thing cost me nearly $200, but I figure it's best to do it safely. I wired the whole thing myself, by the way, along with pretty much the rest of my house. Maybe some future episode I will do some more wiring or something, who knows. Okay, we're back in my kitchen. I've got my controller plugged in. You can see it plugged in over there, and you can see it's telling me open. Well, what that means is that I don't have the sensor plugged into the back of it. You can see here there is a spot. This is where the kettle plugs in. The electrical for the kettle plugs in here, and there's a sensor from the kettle that plugs in here so that the controller always knows what the temperature is in the kettle. And I'll show you that probe in just a moment. Alright, I forgot to point this out when we were in here before, but there is the probe in the kettle, and it comes back out the side here to this wire, and you can see that my door is right here. I open up this a little bit, and there's my controller sitting by the stove, and I just run the wire through the door. Okay, there's my kettle out there. You see I've got the door open a crack, the wire coming through. There's my electrical plug and the plug for the temperature probe, which will get plugged into the back of my controller. But first, before I do that, I've got to put some water in the kettle, because if I plug in those elements with no water, it'll blow the elements. Okay, we are filling it up with water. Nothing special here. One thing I forgot to note about this kettle is that, as you can probably tell, it used to be a beer keg at one point in time, a 58 liter or 15.5 US gallon keg, standard sort of dealie. This particular one is completely legal. I bought it from a place in the States because AAA Brewery went out of business before they actually went into business. So the manufacturer that made their kegs was selling them off as surplus. I didn't make this kettle myself, although I did make one just like it, and turned out my buddy was selling this one. I liked his better, so I sold mine. But I made one that is very, very similar to this one. That means I cut the top out of the keg. I helped my friend weld in all the fittings. We've got a half-inch coupling here that's welded onto the keg that fits a standard half-inch ball valve, and then I've got a quick connect on the end of that. On the back here, the couplings, those are 1-inch half couplings actually. You take a full coupling, cut it in half, and then weld the half couplings onto the kettle. Of course, you have to cut a hole in the kettle first. And there's also a 1/4-inch coupling here for the probe, the temperature probe for the kettle. Like I said, I didn't build this one myself, but I did make one just like it. But I bought my buddy's and sold mine because his was just a little bit better than mine. Okay, the elements are covered now, so we can turn on the controller. Okay, kettle's plugged in and the temperature probe is plugged in. We will come over here and turn it on and see what happens. It's booting up there. So right now it's in manual mode. It has two modes. Manual mode is telling me it's at 0% power. So I can just hold this button down and I can apply a percentage of power. On an average summer day, I only need about 26% power on this to maintain a good boil. But typically when I start off my brewing session, I will go into automatic mode, and now it is telling me that the temperature of the water is 35 degrees Fahrenheit, and what I will do is go into set point 1, and it is currently set for 202 Fahrenheit. I will keep it at that. And just to fire up the brewery, now I'll go back to run mode, and it will just start heating up that water and keep going until it hits 202 Fahrenheit, at which point it will maintain the temperature at 202 Fahrenheit. This is, by the way, a standard industrial controller called a PID controller for you geeks out there. Inside the box, I didn't make the box myself, but I did make one just like it. Once again, my buddy was selling his off and I liked his better, so I sold mine off. But inside the box there's a solid state relay. The PID is connected to the SSR, which controls the power output of the kettle back there. So you can see it's bringing it up to temperature. It's ramping pretty good. It's actually just a little bit below freezing outside today, so I'm not sure if I'll brew today or perhaps tomorrow, but I do want to get the brewery all set up and make sure everything's still working today at very least.